March 6, 2007, 9:47 a.m. Beaumont, Texas. The backhoe bites into the earth. The sound is obscene, a grinding, mechanical chewing of southeast Texas clay, wet and red and heavy, peeling back 48 years of silence one scoop at a time. Forest Lawn Cemetery is not a grand place. It is flat. It is practical. It is the kind of burial ground where oil field workers and school teachers and Baptist deacons are put into the ground without ceremony and left to the quiet jurisdiction of the Gulf Coast humidity. The headstones in this section are horizontal, flush with the grass, designed not for remembrance, but for the convenience of a riding mower. 9 people stand at the edge of the hole. They are not mourners. They are investigators. One of them is Dr. William M. Bass. He is 78 years old, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Tennessee, the founder of the Anthropology Research Facility in Knoxville, a patch of wooded land the press calls the body farm, where donated human corpses are left to decompose in open air so that science can learn to read the language of decay. He has testified in murder trials where the victim was nothing more than a jawbone found in a riverbed. He does not rattle easily, but today, his hands are still. He is watching the backhoe with the patience of a man who knows that what comes out of this ground will either confirm the official record or blow it apart. Standing 3 feet from the edge of the grave, closer than anyone else, is a 47-year-old man named Jay Richardson. Heavy-set, broad face, thick Texas build. He arrived before dawn, sat alone in his truck in the parking lot, and waited for the sun to come up over the flat cemetery grid. Jay Richardson has never met his father. He was born almost 3 months after his father died. His entire life has been built on a foundation of absence. He has seen the photographs. He has heard the records. He has performed tribute shows on the same stages where his father once stood, wearing the same style of clothes, singing the same songs. But he has never seen his father's face. Today, that changes. The steel burial vault emerges from the mud. It weighs 1/4 of a ton. Cemetery workers hose the red clay off the surface. It is moved on a flatbed to a maintenance building at the rear of the property, away from the road, away from any camera that might be hiding in a parked car. Inside the building, the air is cool and smells of concrete dust and machine oil. Funeral director Rodney Landry stands over the vault. He warns the 9 witnesses. He tells them he believes there will be more than bones. He tells them that what they are about to see will not be pleasant. The vault cap is lifted. Inside, the casket is remarkably intact. A 16-gauge steel box, the same casket the world last saw in a photograph taken at Broussard's funeral home in February 1959, flanked by a floral wreath sent by a young Army private named Elvis Presley. A few spots of surface rust, a faint waterline near the seal. But the structure has held. The steel did its job. The room goes silent. Landry unlocks the lid. Jay Richardson steps forward. He does not step back. The lid rises, and there he is. Giles Perry Richardson, Jr., the Big Bopper, the man who wrote Chantilly Lace in the backseat of a car on the way to a recording session. The man who gave George Jones his first #1 hit. The man who coined the term music video before the technology existed to make one. He is still recognizable. The features are discolored, sunken, dusted with mold. But the trademark crew cut is still coiffed. The black suit is still buttoned. The gray and blue tie is still knotted at his throat. He looks less like a skeleton and more like a man who fell asleep in a chair in 1959 and simply never woke up. Dr. Bass looks at the body. Then he looks at Jay. He sees the resemblance immediately. the broad face, the heavy frame, the jawline. He will later say it was one of the most moving moments of his career. Watching a son see his father for the first time over an open casket in a cemetery maintenance shed. But Bass is not here for sentiment. He is here for evidence. Two radiologists wheel portable X-ray equipment to the table. They begin at the skull and work down, inch by inch, bone by bone, exposing the interior architecture of a man who hit a frozen Iowa cornfield at 170 miles per hour nearly half a century ago. The images come back one by one. They tell a story that no conspiracy theory can survive. The skull is crushed. The neck is fractured. The rib cage is compressed into a shape that no longer resembles a rib cage. The pelvis has 7 separate fractures. Both legs show compound breaks in the upper and lower bones. The left hand is the only structure in the entire body that is not shattered. Dr. Bass counts 3 injuries, any one of which would have caused instantaneous death. Crushed skull, broken neck, destroyed chest cavity, and there is no lead, no bullet fragments, no entry wound, no exit wound, no trace of gunpowder residue baked into bone. The X-rays are clean, every frame, every angle. The gun theory is dead. The survival theory is dead. The conspiracy, nursed for 48 years on internet forums and barroom whispers, collapses under the weight of forensic radiology in a maintenance shed in Beaumont, Texas, on a Tuesday morning in March. But the answers only sharpen the original question. Why was a 28-year-old man with a pregnant wife, a career in radio, 20 unrecorded songs in a desk drawer, and a home recording studio half-built in his house in Beaumont, sitting in the back seat of a 4-seat Beechcraft Bonanza in a snowstorm over Iowa at 1 o'clock in the morning? The answer is not about music. It is not about fame. It is not about rock and roll. It is about a bus, a broken heater, a case of the flu, and a kind young man who said yes when he was asked for his seat. This is the forensic reconstruction of the man the world reduced to a punchline, a novelty act, a name sandwiched between 2 bigger names on a memorial plaque. The ghost in the casket. The man who was never supposed to be on that plane. The Big Bopper is generally remembered as a gimmick, a fat man in a checkered jacket, pretending to talk to a girl on a telephone, mugging for the camera, shouting catchphrases. He is usually the third in line when people recite the roll call of February 3rd, 1959. They say it in a specific order: Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. The pause before his name tells you everything about his place in the mythology. He is the footnote. That is a lie built on a stage costume. Strip the leopard skin jacket off. Take away the prop telephone. Look at the man underneath, and what you find is not a novelty act. What you find is an engineer. Giles Perry Richardson Jr. was born in Sabine Pass, Texas, in 1930. His father was an oil field roughneck who dragged the family from rig to rig across the Gulf Coast before settling in Beaumont. The kid played defensive line for the Beaumont High Royal Purples, wearing number 85, hitting hard enough to earn the nickname Killer from his coach. He enrolled at Lehmer College to study pre-law. But he kept wandering into the studios at KTRM, the local radio station. He hung around the control board like a stray dog outside a butcher shop. They gave him a part-time job just to get him out of the hallway. By 1949, he had quit college entirely. The law degree was dead. The microphone had won. He didn't just become a disc jockey. He became a technician of audience. He noticed that college kids were doing a dance called the bop, and he welded that word to his frame. He was 6 feet tall, 240 pounds. He was the Big Bopper. In May of 1957, he broke the world record for continuous radio broadcasting. 5 days, 2 hours, 8 minutes. He sat in a remote setup in the lobby of the Jefferson Theater and played 1,821 records without sleeping. He took showers during the 5-minute newscasts. He lost 35 pounds. The station paid him $746.50 for the overtime. He went home and slept for 20 hours. This was not a man who stumbled into fame. This was a man who understood the mechanics of attention. But the disc jockey booth was a cage. Richardson could see the music industry from the inside, and he understood something that most performers didn't. The real money wasn't in singing. The real money was in writing. The songwriter owns the song. The singer rents it. He wrote a song called White Lightning. It was fast and funny, with a rockabilly kick. He gave it to a young country singer from East Texas named George Jones. It went to #1 on the country charts in 1959. George Jones's first #1 hit. Written by a disc jockey from Beaumont who most people remember only for a telephone gag. He wrote Running Bear for his friend Johnny Preston from Port Arthur. Richardson sang the background vocals on the session himself. The song wasn't released until after his death. In 1960, it also hit #1, 2 chart toppers, neither credited to J.P. Richardson. Both proof that the man inside the Big Bopper costume was operating on a level the audience never saw. He had written 38 songs by the time he died. 20 more sat unrecorded in a desk drawer. He was building a recording studio in his house. He was planning to invest in a radio station. He wasn't chasing stardom. He was building infrastructure, constructing a machine that would generate royalties, playing the long game of the music industry. He understood the architecture of the business because he had watched it from the control room for a decade. He saw how the sausage was made, and he had a blueprint to make it better. But a blueprint doesn't pay rent. Chantilly Lace had sold over 1 million copies, and he was broke. The economics of the 1950s music industry were a rigged casino. What trickled down to the artist was a fraction of the gross, paid out on a schedule designed by accountants who understood that delay is a form of profit. Richardson had a wife, Adrienne, a daughter, Deborah. And now, in the winter of 1958, Adrienne was pregnant again. He needed cash, not royalty statements, cash. The General Artists Corporation offered him a slot on the winter dance party, 3 weeks on the road, guaranteed performance fees. He kissed Adrienne goodbye. He packed a suitcase, and he stepped onto a bus that was not designed for the task it had been given. The itinerary was an act of administrative cruelty. 24 cities in 24 days, no rest days. The routing zigzagged back and forth across Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, covering hundreds of miles of frozen 2-lane highway between shows that were sometimes less than 12 hours apart. The bus was a repurposed school vehicle with thin walls, bad tires, and a heating system that treated functionality as a suggestion. When the temperature outside dropped to 20 below zero, the temperature inside dropped with it. The musicians slept sitting up, wrapped in coats and blankets, their breath crystallizing in the air above their heads. They ate cold cuts and candy bars. They washed their stage clothes in gas station sinks. The bus kept breaking down. On a stretch of highway in the middle of a Wisconsin forest, the engine died. The musicians burned newspapers in the aisle to keep from freezing to death. The drummer, Carl Bunch, developed frostbite on his feet and had to be hospitalized. They were now a tour without a drummer. Richardson suffered worse than most. He was a big man. The bus seats were not built for a 240-pound frame. His knees jammed against the seat in front of him. He couldn't stretch out. He couldn't sleep. And within the first week, the flu found him. It hit him like a freight train. Fever, chills, a cough that rattled his chest. He was sweating through his stage clothes, then shivering in the frozen bus. He was too big for the seats, too sick for the cold, and too professional to cancel a show. By the time the tour reached Clear Lake, Iowa, on February 2, 1959, Richardson was a wreck. His voice, the instrument that had kept an audience captive for 5 straight days in a theater lobby in Beaumont, was ragged. His body ached. And then he heard about the plane. For 48 years, 2 pieces of evidence kept the conspiracy alive. The first was the body. When the wreckage was discovered on the morning of February 3rd, the pilot was found inside the cockpit. Holly and Valens were found near the debris field. But Richardson was found 40 feet from the main wreckage, lying in the open field, in a position that looked like a man who had walked there. That distance became the seed of a myth. If his body was further away, he must have survived. If he survived, he must have crawled. If he crawled, he was alive after the impact, lying in the snow, dying slowly while the farmhouse sat a half-mile away with its lights off. The image was unbearable. It transformed a sudden death into a prolonged one, and for decades, the Richardson family could not shake it. Jay Richardson grew up with the question hanging over his childhood, like a ceiling that was too low. Did his father suffer? Did he lie in that field, conscious, freezing, calling out into the void? Did he die alone? The physics tell a different story. Richardson was the largest occupant, 240 pounds, unrestrained in the rear seat of a 4-seat aircraft that went from 170 miles per hour to 0 in a fraction of a second. When the nose hit dirt, the rear of the fuselage whipped forward. The cabin opened. Richardson was ejected. 40 feet is not the distance a dying man crawls. 40 feet is the distance a 240-pound body travels when launched from a disintegrating airframe. Dr. Bass confirmed it in 2007. Compound fractures in both legs, shattered pelvis, crushed rib cage, broken neck. He was delivered to that field by Sir Isaac Newton. The second piece of evidence was a gun. 2 months after the crash, the farmer clearing wreckage from his field found a pistol. It belonged to Buddy Holly. It had been fired. A couple of rounds. No one could say when. The conspiracy machine, which requires only 2 ingredients, ambiguity and grief, manufactured a narrative. Someone fired the gun aboard the plane. Maybe the pilot was shot. The owner of Dwyer Flying Service fed the flame, insisting his pilot was competent, arguing something must have incapacitated him. An aviation insurance man later told acquaintances, as stated fact, that the pilot had been shot through his seat. The story was never proven, never disproven. It simply circulated, gaining mass with each retelling. The CAB investigation told a simpler story. The Bonanza's Sperry F3 attitude indicator operated on a principle that was the reverse of the instrument the pilot had trained on. On Peterson's training model, a descent moved the horizon line up. On this aircraft, a descent moved it down. In a blinding snowstorm, with no visible horizon, a pilot relying on muscle memory would read the instrument backwards. He would fly, with full confidence and full power, directly into the ground. The official verdict was spatial disorientation. Simple, mechanical, unglamorous. And that was its fatal weakness as a public narrative. Simple explanations do not satisfy grief. Grieving people want a villain. The gun gave them one, until Dr. Bass put the X-rays on the light box. No lead, no bullet, no gunshot trauma. Every fracture consistent with high-speed impact. The spent cartridges were evidence of a Tuesday afternoon in West Texas, not a crime at 800 feet. That is the mechanism. That is the forensic truth. February 2nd, 1959. Clear Lake, Iowa. The surf ballroom sits on the north shore of the lake like a landlocked ship. Art Deco, palm tree murals painted on the walls, a cruel joke in a town where the wind chill has not climbed above 0 in a week. The dance floor is made of maple. The ceiling is high. Tonight, every seat and every square foot of standing room is sold. 1,100 teenagers from the surrounding farm towns, kids who drove through the dark on frozen roads to see the stars they'd heard on the radio. This show was not on the original itinerary. It was added at the last minute to squeeze one more gate receipt out of the performers. Backstage, Richardson was in the worst shape of any of them. The flu had settled deep into his chest. His face was flushed. His eyes were glassy. His 240-pound frame, which he used on stage like a weapon, lunging, dancing, dominating the space, felt like a liability. Every joint ached. Every cough shook his ribs. But the contract said play. So he played. The show kicked off around 8 o'clock. Frankie Sardo opened. Then Richardson walked out. Here is what the audience saw. A big man in a loud jacket, grinning, working the room, pulling a prop telephone off a stand and pretending to sweet-talk a girl on the other end of the line. They saw the Big Bopper. They saw the act. The exaggerated swagger. The deep voice dropping into a comic drawl. The exuberant showman who made every teenager in the room feel like they were in on the joke. Here is what the audience did not see. A 28-year-old father burning with fever, running on adrenaline and professionalism, performing through a flu that had been eating him for days. They did not see the man behind the costume. They never did. He finished his set. He walked off stage, sweating through his shirt. Ritchie Valens went on, then the intermission, then Dion and the Belmonts. Buddy Holly closed the show. The entire cast came back for a loose, ragged La Bamba. 1,100 kids screamed. The maple floor shook. It was over by 11:30. After the final number, the machinery of fate assembled itself from small, ordinary decisions. None of them felt significant at the time. All of them were fatal. A Beechcraft Bonanza from Dwyer Flying Service at Mason City. 3 passenger seats. $36 each. He had booked seats for himself, Tommy Allsup, and Waylon Jennings. Richardson found Jennings backstage. He was straight about it. He was sick. The bus was killing him. He asked for the seat. Jennings, 21, healthy, built for discomfort, didn't hesitate. "You take the plane. I'll take the bus." No coin was tossed. It was kindness. Pure and ordinary and fatal. In another corner, Ritchie Valens won Allsup's seat on a coin flip. Heads. He shouted that he'd won. The final manifest. Holly, Valens, Richardson, and a 21-year-old pilot who had failed an instrument competency check 9 months earlier, flying an aircraft with gyroscopic instruments he had never trained on. At the loading dock, the last exchange. Holly ribbed Jennings. "I hope your old bus freezes up again." Jennings fired back. "I hope your old plane crashes." They laughed. They parted. At 12:40 a.m. on February 3rd, the 3 passengers arrived at the Mason City Municipal Airport. The airport was small, rural, designed for crop dusters and weekend hobbyists, not late-night charter flights in deteriorating weather. The Bonanza sat on the tarmac, its engine cold. Richardson, the largest of the three, folded himself into the back seat alongside Valens. Holly took the front right seat, next to the pilot. The cabin was small. 4 adults in a Bonanza 35 is tight under the best of circumstances. With Richardson's frame and luggage stacked wherever it would fit, the aircraft was loaded at or near its weight limit. At 12:55 a.m., the Bonanza lifted off runway 17. Hubert Dwyer watched from the tower. He saw the tail light climb to 800 feet, banked northwest toward Fargo. Then the light began to descend. Not suddenly, not in a plunge. It descended gradually, steadily, as though the pilot was executing a controlled maneuver. The angle was shallow. The power was full. The engine was screaming. The red light grew smaller. It merged with the white ground and disappeared. The radio remained silent. Dwyer waited through the night. He did not initiate a search. He thought Peterson had simply flown out of visual range. It was not until 3:30 a.m. that he raised the alarm. At 9 a.m., Dwyer flew the route himself. 5 miles northwest, he saw crumpled red metal against a fence line. The propeller had still been spinning when it hit. Roger Peterson never knew he was descending. His instrument told him he was climbing. His muscle memory confirmed the lie. He flew the aircraft into the earth with the absolute confidence of a man who believed he was flying into the sky. Richardson was launched through the disintegrating fuselage and over the fence. Gray suit coat, red checked vest, blue trousers, skull split. The coroner couldn't identify him by sight. He had to take fingerprints. In Beaumont, Adrienne was asleep, 5 months pregnant. No one had called. On the bus, Jennings sat in the dark, shivering, the heater broken again, exactly as Holly had predicted. He believed his friends were already in Fargo, sleeping in warm beds. There was no autopsy in 1959, not for the passengers. The coroner, Dr. Ralph Smiley, conducted an external examination. He documented the injuries. He took fingerprints for identification. He signed the death certificates and released the remains. Only the pilot received a detailed post-mortem, because the Civil Aeronautics Board needed to determine whether he had been medically incapacitated before the crash. He had not. He was healthy. He was alert. He simply flew the wrong direction and didn't know it. The passengers were sent home. Holly was buried in Lubbock, Valens in the San Fernando Valley, Richardson in Beaumont. That was supposed to be the end. On the public stage, the nation mourned. Radio stations played Buddy Holly records back to back. Teenagers wept in diners and parked cars. The winter dance party, with a grotesque institutional momentum, did not stop. The surviving performers were put back on the bus. A 15-year-old kid named Bobby V was pulled from the audience to sing Buddy Holly's songs that same night in Moorhead. The promoters counted the receipts. The contracts were honored. The machine did not stop. On the private stage in Beaumont, the machinery of grief was quieter and more permanent. Adrienne Richardson received the news. She was 22 years old. She had a 5-year-old daughter. She was 5 months pregnant. Her husband had left for a 3-week tour to earn enough money to finish building a recording studio in their house. He was coming home. He promised. He left behind $8 in a savings account. His most valuable assets were a $400 Dodge and a $100 guitar. The million-selling record, Chantilly Lace, had not yet translated into the kind of wealth the public assumed a hitmaker possessed. The royalty pipeline was long, the middlemen were many, and the check that would have changed the family's life was still moving through the accounting system of Mercury records at the speed of corporate bureaucracy. 3 months later, J. Perry Richardson was born. The cultural aftershock has been mythologized for 6 decades. Don McLean wrote the eulogy. American Pie gave the tragedy a title. But McLean's song was selective. It mourned the era. It did not mourn J.P. Richardson by name. And the erasure deepened. Buddy Holly had an advocate, Maria Elena, a music industry professional who protected his catalog for decades. Ritchie Valens had a family who fought for his story, and a 1987 Hollywood film that cemented it. But Adrienne Richardson looked at the industry that put her husband on a frozen bus, sent him into a snowstorm for a paycheck, and killed him for the price of a $36 plane ticket. She turned her back on it. She retreated. She raised her children in Beaumont. She did not promote the catalog. She did not organize tribute concerts. She did not hire publicists or negotiate reissue deals. She did not fight to keep his name on the marquee, and the marquee forgot him. George Jones kept performing White Lightning for 3 decades, and most of the audience never knew where it came from. They heard Jones. They didn't hear the dead man who wrote the song. Consider what the X-rays could not reveal. Richardson was 28, the oldest performer on the Winter Dance Party by 7 years. Holly was 22. Valens was 17. They were boys. Richardson was a man. He had served in the army. He had been married for 7 years. He had worked in radio for a decade. He was not at the beginning of his arc. He was at the fulcrum. He wrote across genres without blinking. Chantilly Lace was rock and roll. White Lightning was country. Running Bear was pop with a cross-cultural rhythm section. He moved between formats the way a man moves between rooms in his own house. He didn't see walls between genres. He saw doors. He coined the term music video in a 1958 interview with the British magazine Disc, 23 years before MTV signed on the air. He was building a studio in Beaumont at a time when the idea of artist-owned recording was radical. The studios were controlled by the labels. The labels were controlled by the distributors. The artist was the last person to touch the product and the last person to get paid. Richardson understood this. He had watched it from the DJ booth for a decade. He knew that the man who owns the room where the music is made owns the music. If he had lived, he would have been 33 when the Beatles landed at JFK. He would not have been a relic of the 50s. He would have been a gatekeeper of the 60s, a seasoned songwriter with a functioning studio, a radio platform, and a catalog spanning 3 genres. He was designing the independent producer model before Berry Gordy built Motown, before Phil Spector built Gold Star, before the industry caught up with the idea that the artist could also be the architect. Instead, 20 unrecorded songs went into a desk drawer. A studio was never finished. A widow took her grief underground, and the world reduced J.P. Richardson to the 3rd line on a memorial plaque and a prop telephone in the collective memory. On March 6, 2007, Richardson's remains were placed into a new casket, donated by the same manufacturer that built the original, and reburied. Not in the flat section, but in the monument section, where a bronze statue and a Texas Historical Commission marker had been installed. For the first time in 48 years, J.P. Richardson had a grave you could find without a map. J. Richardson went on to perform as the Big Bopper Jr. He toured the revival circuit, singing Chantilly Lace on the same stages where his father performed it for the last time. He played the Surf Ballroom. He stood on the same maple floor. He died on August 21, 2013. Heart failure. Age 54. He was buried next to his father in Forest Lawn Cemetery in Beaumont. Two Richardsons, two caskets, side by side in the Texas clay. One never knew the other. Both sang the same song. Both were buried in the same dirt, in a cemetery the rest of the world drives past on the way to Houston. The music didn't die on February 3, 1959. But the third name on the plaque was buried twice, once in the ground, and once in the footnotes. This is the history the X-rays revealed, not the conspiracy, the erasure. Remember the disc jockey from Beaumont who broke the world broadcasting record, coined a term 2 decades ahead of its time, gave a country singer his first #1, and died at 28 because he had the flu and the bus was too cold, and a kind young man said yes when he asked for a seat on a plane. Remember the name the plaque almost forgot. Giles Perry Richardson, Jr., the Big Bopper. The third name, the ghost in the casket. The man who was never supposed to be on that plane.